Evening, Kelly has a previous engagement which she does during Lent, and Eric had another meeting. So we're going to start this evening with our scripture reading for the evening, which Eric chose, and then Deb's going to introduce our speakers for us. So our reading this evening comes from the Message version, and it's from the book of Amos, chapter 5. I can't stand your religious meetings. I'm fed up with your conferences and conventions. I want nothing to do with your religion projects, your pretentious slogans and goals. I'm sick of your fundraising schemes, your public relations, and your image making. I've had all I can take of your noisy ego music. When was the last time you sang to me? Do you know what I want? I want justice, oceans of it. I want fairness, rivers of it. That's what I want. That's all I want.
Hi, I'm the Eric last-minute substitute tonight. We were at a meeting together, and he thought he was done for the day and was informed that he wasn't, so he handed me the introduction. Thank you for being here. Kelly always begins in prayer, which I didn't know that was in my job, but I'll give it a shot, so let us pray. Creator God, originator of inclusivity, help us hear the stories that Maggie and Krystal will share tonight with new ears and new hearts, and begin to see opportunities for each of us to join the conversation and change the narrative. Live as you would have us live. Amen. Ladies, you want to come forward? Maggie Wood is the Executive Director of Inclusive Communities.
Hi, everyone.
And Krystal is the COO, is that correct?
Yes.
I will give you them. Maybe you should explain your organization rather than me trying to.
Try it.
That's why I'm here, to learn about
Thank
it.
you, Deb. Thanks you both. I like that oceans of justice and rivers of fairness. That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I'm Maggie Wood. I'm the Executive Director of Inclusive Communities. How many of you here know about Inclusive Communities or have heard about us before? All right, so most of you. There's a few that haven't though, so I'm really glad that you're here tonight too. We are a human relations organization that battles prejudice, bigotry, and discrimination through educational programming that encourages awareness and fosters leadership and advocacy. And we're always looking for ways to make this a more just and inclusive society here in Omaha and the surrounding area. We have been around since 1938, so that's a long time. We originally started out as the National Conference of Christian and Jews back in 1938, and it was started by a group of business people, a group of well-intentioned Christian business people who were much like the Countryside Church, who were fed up with, the boycotting of Jewish businesses. So they came together. They said, "Not in our town. We're not going to do that here." And unfortunately, racism and prejudice still exists nearly 80 years later, and so our work is still necessary. So we have adapted through the times and are dealing with a lot of different things right now. So we've had this opportunity to really build our programming. I've been at Inclusive Communities since September of 2015, so not a very long time at all. And we're really excited about the programming that we do there. And I'm going to let Krystal talk a little bit more about our segments of programming.
Yeah. How close does this need to be?
This is too
Before
close.
it makes me hear my own voice too much. So I kind of want to pass these out, but I know there's a cardinal rule with teaching where if I pass it out, then you'll read it, and then you won't be paying attention to what we say. So if I pass these out, will you promise to multitask? Part of what, and on the flyer that said we would do is share transformational stories about some of the work that we do. I want to go a step further. I'm going to tell you about the secret of our programming, why it works. And I'm going to make you think about it on yourself, or in yourself, in your own lives, and have you start to question those things. So then, as we move through this conversation, when you read some of these are post evaluations. You'll begin to have a better understanding of some of the comments. So you can pass them around. You don't need to keep the one you want. These, like I said, these are just post-evals from our 4-day residential program, Inclusity. It's one of our longest running programs, almost 15 years, and that's not counting when we did it in the 70s for a little bit. So on a basic level, we do 3 different kind of sectors of programming. We do youth-based programming, community-based programming, and business programming. I love that Maggie says that our programming for our youth prepares the kids for the world, but our business and community programming prepares the world for these kids. And we know that the millennials coming up are more demanding, especially of inclusion and respect for diversity than any of the other generations before. And we see that in the way that they communicate, and technology has absolutely impacted how they get information, how much information they have, and the way that they communicate. So and we'll get through this stuff because I feel like it's boring, you don't really care about this stuff, but so you understand what I'm talking about. Inclusity is a 4-day residential program just for high school students. So it's a camp. We pull them to Ashland, Nebraska. We go to Carol Joy Halling, the Nebraska Lutheran Outdoor Ministries. It's their land out there. And for 4 days, we take away their phones, and we promise that we're like, look, we've done this every, nobody's died from it yet. And they give them up, they forget that they even had them, and we go deep into identities and diversity and inclusion work. We also do full-day workshops in the schools. That includes high schools and in middle schools. We have Incluship is our high school internship program, so after schools use a workshop to recruit students for camp, they come to camp for 4 days, then they send representatives back to our, as interns in our program, that have a lifeline to go back to the schools and then serve as leadership opportunities in running or starting their diversity clubs. Omaha Table Talk, have you guys heard of Omaha? Did anybody go to the program in February? Countryside was a generous location for our main event where we, every February we talk about race and identity, and we do it in 20 different locations across Omaha. We also have other monthly programming. January, you were also one of our community partners for our interfaith dialogue. And then we have some business programming, so this is where we're going to the workplaces. So we have youth that come through the middle school and high school, and then they start volunteering with us, and then eventually they work for us. But if they don't work for us, they might go into other organizations and then come back and they're like, what is this place? Like, why does nobody look like me? Why does nobody use the same language? So our business programming is aimed at creating inclusive workspaces. I was just talking with Ben about this, that it's easy to have inclusion in a homogenous group. When we all look alike and we all think alike, things flow easier. Diversity is naturally disruptive. So if you think of inclusion as a goal, but diversity is the way that you measure it, because inclusion is easy. When you increase that diversity of background, thought, experiences, that's harder to maintain that inclusion, so it's something you have to work at. So all of our business programs are aimed at helping you get to that goal while having a successful measure of what that goal looks like. So that's just our programming. The reason why we're good at what we do is because the foundation of our program is about identities. And we can all think of our own identities, and it's easy when you have an identity and that identity is in a privileged group. When you're in that privileged group, you think of yourself as normal, like older white men. It's easy to be like, I don't have or straight white men too, like I don't have a orientation, I don't have a race, I don't have a gender, I'm normal. But when you think like, even those of us that have privileged identities, we all have identities. We all have a gender, we all have sexual orientation, we all have a faith, we have all of these things. When we think of identities, there's that kind of that privileged group, and then there's a group who's marginalized and oppressed, and this is different in all different areas. So I'm specifically talking about our program as it relates to geographically where we are now, and in this time, in this place. So with those identities, there are 8 that we focus on. When you talk about a privileged group or a marginalized group, it's called a system of advantage. So you can think of these 8, which might be in a privileged group and who might be in an oppressed group. But those 8 systems that we educate on are age, faith, appearance, gender, orientation, class, ability, and race. So you can go through those in your head and think of who has historically been in the privileged group or the oppressed group. One of the things that people start thinking about when they think about privilege is they feel shame or guilt because they can think about those that have suffered because of the power and the abuse of that privilege, or they retreat into the marginalized identities that they have. Like, well, it doesn't matter if I'm white, I also grew up poor. So to think through that we all have these identities, and not to sink to that place of shame or guilt because one of those identities you have is more privileged than another. But recognize that with those identities, that power and privilege, it's how you use it for good or for evil. And recognizing how you pull people up that ladder as you climb it with your identities. One of the other, and feel free to chime in, Maggie.
You're on a roll.
The things to recognize with those identities too is that those are just 8, and you can think of plenty that I didn't list that in our program we'll couple them under. So you can think nationality or language, and I would put them under race or in some cases class or ability. But with these identities, they intersect. So I identify as a white woman, able-bodied, and I'm those things all the time. I don't wake up and decide I'm just going to be white today, or I'm just going to be a female today. I'm those things all the time. But in some situations, one or more of those identities at a forefront. When I'm in a board of directors meeting and I look around the table and everyone is in their 50s, in a white male in a powerful corporate position, I'm very aware of my age and my gender. But when I'm sitting at home on the couch eating a bucket of ice cream watching Scandal, I couldn't care 2 cents. So I have these identities. What I want you to do, and those are my identities, and they intersect differently, especially in my experience as I've gotten older, the way that I experience my female identity has changed as I come into my age, and especially as I move and have power through my positions and what I hold in my job. I find that the way that people treat me or the way that I have to act to demand a room is different than the way I used to. So here's the engaging part. I want everybody to kind of take 30 seconds. You don't have to interact with anybody in case anybody's getting nervous about this. I just want you to think of 3 identities that are pivotal to your existence. Like when you think of who I am, and you can think of just those 8 that I listed before, what of those identities are like your top 3 that you cling on to? And I can think with my colleagues when we've done this, I never list race in my top 3. Because to me being white is normal, and in Omaha, that's what Omaha looks like, of almost 87%. In the way that Omaha is segregated, where I live, race is an important identity to me because that's all I see. My race, white is all I see, and that's what I fit and identify as. So it's not one of those that make the top 3. So I want you to think silently to yourself, what are the 3 identities, and if you can only come to 2, that's fine, but think of the ones that are like, this is me, yeah, like I identify, I'm a strong woman, or I'm a proud man, and you can go beyond that. Think of identities like I'm a mother, or I'm a businesswoman, and that is who I am. That's something I very much relate to. But just think to yourself for a little bit. And now I want you to think of a time where you were put in a situation where you could only have one of those identities, where someone made you only be able to recognize one, and that you couldn't be the other at the same time. And now, I'm going to ask the brave soul to share their example. And I can buy time, I can share my own, if nobody's like ready to like bursting at the seams.
The one single or the?
The conflicting ones, well, and or your primary identities that you have to. Go ahead.
Yeah, the one I think of that comes to the forefront in uncomfortable situations, and was more in the past, is female in a business setting, where everyone else and it was a board situation. Yeah, it was like, wow, you really have to fight to have the credibility, because it's assumed you don't.
Does anybody else have a similar, different experience here?
And it's not something that I think about very often, but I took an online class, and it was very interactive with all the other students, but the only thing you knew about the other students and that they knew about me was the name. So they could determine my gender, but it was very obvious to me that, oh, well, they don't know me and they don't know my race, my ethnicity, my color, anything about me other than what I say and my name. And so I didn't get to fall back on any of those assumptions or have any of those assumptions about other people. I just remember being struck by that. It wasn't something I normally thought about in class.
Yeah, and that's really interesting when you say that, and Deb, when you talk about being a female too, and especially in the business world, and you look at companies that are hiring, and if you want a diverse company, and if you want to hire people that don't look like you, that are bringing things to the table, there are a lot of people that might look at a name, might not be able to pronounce it, and therefore that person doesn't get selected to come in for an interview. So those are some of the things that we talk about when we go in and talk to businesses and things of that nature. But what Krystal explained about the intersectionality of everything, there's a lot to talk about. That's why our camp takes 4 days, because we get these kids in a room and we give them the language that they need to grasp onto their identities, so that when they're out of the safe space that's the camp, and they're back in their schools and they're walking down the halls and they're hearing kids bullying each other, they have the opportunity in that language to figure out ways that they can help confront that within their school system. So, Krystal said it earlier, it's something that I say all the time, is these kids, we're getting them ready for the world, but the world may not be ready for these kids yet, and it's gonna happen faster than we think. The global environment and how we come together through the internet is changing how we interact with each other. So the work that Inclusive Communities has been doing and will continue to do is really important. And I also I know that there's some time limits on things, so I want to make sure that if anybody has any questions about anything, feel free to jump in and ask. But I also want to talk about the sheets that we handed out there, because talking to you about kids that have come through our programming, and for us to tell you the story about the young man who didn't understand anything and then he came out in our camp because he really understood and felt like it was a safe space is not my story to tell. It's their story to tell. We have several examples of what we've done over the last 15 years with this camp, and it's evidence that they are really engaged because they keep coming back to us. We have a 22-year-old young woman who works for us who actually has 8 years of experience with Inclusive Communities, because she came to camp when she was 15 years old, was so moved by the program that she came back to be an intern. She volunteered. She went to Creighton. She's a social justice warrior, and now she's working for us full time, and she's managing all of these things and understanding all of these topics that we're talking about. Well, we're also creating a safe space for her to work and live the identities that she has. The examples that we sent around, do you want to talk a little bit about what some of those things might be?
Yeah, so when we talk about identities and the programming, and as Maggie said, the terms and the language, this is the reason why the program has the effect it does, is because we feel things and go through situations all the time. You can probably think of something that happened sometime in the past, maybe when you were younger, and then you came into your adulthood and you're like, oh, I had no idea that's what that was. We ramp that up and teach them the terms and language now. So we start with the foundation of the program is identities. What identities do you have? How do they intersect? How does that impact your perception of the world and your experiences as you move through the world? And then we get them to reflect internally, and they go, yeah, this is how I identify. And then we go, hold the phone. Did you know that person has different identities than you, and the way that they perceive the world, the experiences they have, are different. And even if we had the exact same identities, our experiences and perceptions of the world can still be different. Now, how can we be different and still get along? And that's why we're a human relations organization. So as you see on those sheets, a lot of the things that we're gauging is increased empathy, empowerment, civic engagement. When we talk about empowerment, we also talk about power, like what control do you think you have over your environment and the direction that you're going in life. One of the things we get asked a lot, because we bring together very different groups, like our last camp in January, which is some of the evaluations you have, was Ralston, who's in that district, the superintendent's son, just died by suicide. So a week after that happened, we had them at camp. We brought together Creighton Prep, Blackburn Alternative, Girls Inc., and the Unitarian youth groups from both First and Second Unitarian. So that's a diverse group of individuals with some varying backgrounds. And Girls Inc. is a community-based program, and Blackburn is an alternative OPS program. Creighton Prep is a private Jesuit high school, and Ralston's just a public Ralston school.
Yeah.
So when you look at those evaluations, you want to talk about diversity. One of the questions we get a lot is, how do you get, especially how do you get Christian and Catholic participants to engage with learning about diversity, especially when we talk about things like sexual orientation? How do you get them to participate? And the reality is, we're not changing values, we're not changing morals. What we're talking about is kindness and how we treat one another. We can have different identities, different beliefs, and that doesn't impact, or that doesn't necessarily mean that our interactions need to be negative or hurtful. So how can we still be kind to each other given our differences?
Yeah, and I was just going to say, we're doing a lot of talking right now, and that's not really what happens at camp. We're not preaching to these kids and telling them this is what you need to do and this is how the world works. We're introducing topics to them, and we're giving them the space to have conversations with each other. So they're really coming up with their solutions and their plans together on how they're going to make an impact on the world. So that the magic of everything that we do at Inclusive Communities is really about making sure that space is there for other people to have conversations. So I wanted to find out if any of you had any questions at all that we could answer about Inclusive Communities.
Can you comment on, I noticed that you mentioned ability level in your 8. Just what are children with special needs part of this or not specifically, or what kind of stuff is being done in that realm?
Yeah, so for the selection of, we call them delegations. Delegates are kids, delegations are what the schools pick. We ask for a breakfast club, so the schools are in charge of that. And what we want are your traditional leaders. They're running your sports clubs, the student council, the government, they're your class officers. They are traditionally represented as those popular kids. And then we want your non-traditional leaders, so maybe they're leading the anime club, or your GSAs, or they're active in class, but they don't have that social capital that comes along with being popular, but they have that leadership potential. And then we want your kids that have a foot out the door. Maybe they're not even coming to school. Maybe they're sitting alone at lunch. Maybe the only friends they have in the school are adults and the teachers. And we find that by bringing them together, there's true exchange of social capital. We have people that have power given to those that don't have power, and those that have potential, we help water those seeds, and then a new friend group comes out of it, and that's how we impact community. So how kids are selected, the schools select them. As for ability level, we've had a variety. We've had students that are hearing impaired. We've had a variety of cognitive ranges, autism. This past camp, we had a number of people that had different mental health considerations that we took into place: anxiety disorders, depression, schizophrenia. Asperger's was one of the past. So the January's camp. So
and some of our exercises that we do there are specifically based around ability and understanding, and not only things that you can see for an individual and forgetting like, okay, it's so easy for me to get there. But if somebody's in a wheelchair, you know, why aren't we thinking about those individuals as well? So not only the seen abilities, but also the unseen abilities as well.
And then we have a specific, our programming, we move through the identities, we move through, we talk about socialization, how did you come to believe the things about identities that you believe? When were they taught to you? When did you start internalizing it? When did you change your behaviors based off of this thing that you heard? And when did you start institutionalizing and teaching it to others? We talk about enforcer boxes. What are stereotypes that we have and who keeps us in those boxes? How are they reinforced? The media, our parents, our peers, our faiths. How do you challenge us? How do you bring it down? We talk about a power and control grid, in the Duluth model of power and control. How do you get in places? When does it become abuses? So we move throughout our program, we move through all the different identities. On Saturday, and you'll see on some of these evaluations as you pass them around, is heavy racism, sexism. And by sexism, we go into domestic violence, the rape culture. We talk about who has power, what we have to do things, what does it look like change, not victim blaming, not slut shaming. Then we spend a lot of time talking about culture. Where does that come from? What does it mean? How is it more than a race? I don't know, especially for those of you that identify as white. Have you ever thought about what does it mean to be white? And how can you separate that from being American? How much do you associate those as one and the same? So we spend a lot of time having the students, and just like Maggie talked about, the way that our program goes is we set up with terms and concepts, we engage them in some type of activity where they apply whatever we talked about, and then we process the hell out of it. And that's where the magic happens, is when they start talking, because we just set it up and back away, because they're the experts on themselves and their own identities, and then they start talking to each other, and someone says, yeah, well, I think this, and then someone else goes, really, I don't, and then, oh, now you're dialoguing, gotcha. And that's how all of camp goes for 4 days. And we do it large group, small group, cabins, culture groups, so that's how we split them up, we get them moving and shaking and talking. So one of those specifically on Sundays, an ability exercise where we get them reflecting on the different visible and hidden identities. We have some called Culture Walk the Line activities, and we do that, which also helps us process things like iceberg, what you see, what you think, what you presume and prejudge when you look at someone versus what's under there, and what you really know about someone, how you dig into that. How can, nobody ever said this work was easy.
No.
It's not like I declare I'm an ally and now I am. You work at it every day. And the hard part is, especially when we're talking about identities, is that means I have to treat every single one of you as an individual. And that takes time and getting to know, and words or language that you prefer or don't, or triggers that you have, and taking time to correct myself when I figure out what the best way to interact with you is. And that's tedious and long. But man, does it make you feel appreciated as the individual you are, and all of those identities that you want represented, not just the one that I see and think is important, but the ones that you say are important, that you want recognized. And we help the students feel special and do that.
So I may have missed this, but how many times do you offer this camp?
We offer the camp 3 or 4 times a year, and they usually, it doesn't happen in the summer because it's hard to get, people lined up for that.
Because you use the school
as the base for bringing people in. And then we've also reached out, community groups are another way that we're engaging with individuals as well. So it's 3 or 4 times a year, and they come out on a Friday afternoon. That's when we take their cell phones away, and they're like, no! And then they stay with us through Monday afternoon, and on Monday afternoon we're like, hey, you guys want your phones back? And they're like, oh yeah, we forgot we had phones! So that's really exciting to see. And then they get their phones back, and everybody's like getting information from each other, because they're creating new friendships and ways that they can support each other within this community. And then we have a reunion that happens after that too. So they come back and they share what's happening in their schools. And we've seen a lot of these kids come back and say, like, I have never experienced anything like I have with Inclusity, which is the name of our camp. And
What's it called?
it's called Inclusity. We're into really fun names, Inclusity. and inclusive, that's our internship.
I came up with that one.
She gets all the credit.
So then, in the other programming you do, you mentioned the, the work with businesses, corporations, and so on. Do you have a mini kind of workshop setting
Yeah.
where people get to explore, while it may not be as
Yeah.
in depth, certainly as
Right.
the camp, but they get to explore some of these ideas and the way it impacts work?
Yeah.
We have 1 hour, 2 hour, 4 hour, 8 hour. Most of the work that we do, even though we wish it was just a plug and play, it all really needs to be customized
Yeah.
to
Yeah,
any
sure.
Yeah.
to any company, because every company might be dealing with some other piece of culture within there, things that they're trying to address. Or they say, hey, we just want you to come in. We know we don't have a problem, and then we get in there and we're like, oh, we'll do a culture survey beforehand, and then we find out there actually is a problem. So we collect feedback from them, ask them what they want. This work does make people feel uncomfortable. And if you're in a workplace setting, and I know when I first started working, it was like, you are an androgynous robot, you're there to do a job, you're not a woman, you're not any of these things, you just need to get this work done. And bringing that into a corporate culture where that is where, hundreds of people work, they want to just come in and do their job and leave, but there are lots of opportunities for us to really help engage and make a company more vibrant.
One of the things that I think, exactly what Maggie's talking about, we kind of get two types of businesses, those that are being proactive and they're like, we know this is coming up. I like to think that diversity and inclusion is the new STEM, where it's getting sexy. So people are proactive and they know it's important, they see their workforce demanding it, and then there's those that are reactive. Something happened and they need us to help clean up.
Yeah, and with the advent of social media and with the rise up of individuals that use that form not only to call out companies or organizations that might not be doing something that is, socially acceptable or responsible, but it also gives people the opportunity to say really hateful things on comments on, if you look through Facebook and you look at the comments on some of those things, we know that we have a lot of work to do. So when people ask us, like, how can you show us that your work is needed in this city, I'm like, let's just print out this Facebook page, and you can see there that you should give us lots of money.
The other thing is, with adults, and you're probably getting to this, it's uncomfortable. Like, I'm here to get paid and do a job. I don't want to talk about identities or race or gender. Like, I'm just here to work. I don't see that. And the unfortunate part about being blind to any identity is that then you don't get to celebrate the good parts of it and the creativity and the differences that it brings and in the way that it enriches the environment. With kids, we get to use a hammer. We do a norming thing before each activity where we go, what does it take to have safe, hard conversations? And they say things like trust, active listening, respect. And then we have fun things like what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, which means what we talk about at camp stays at camp. One diva, one mic. So when one person's talking, you listen, and keep it real. So when we talk about what it's like being you in the hallways of your school, we don't want you to say the N word. Say it. You don't have to say the B word. Say it. What is it like to live your life? And let's talk about it for real. Let's talk about Baltimore. Let's talk about Ferguson. Let's talk about rape. Let's talk about how you were treated and who you want to be treated as. So with kids, we can use a hammer. We can do that. With adults, oh no. It's a scalpel. It's about what do you need to be effective in your workspace. And then we move towards what is your workspace willing to celebrate, because we have a compliance, which is all right. So let's not discriminate or harass. Let's not get any lawsuits. And then the idea of tolerance of like, great, I'll put up with you being different than me in this space. We want you to get to celebrate. Like, thank you for your differences. This is a more enriched environment because of it. Bring all of you to this space. Now, it's a business environment, so bring all of you to the space and do your job like you're supposed to. But how can we capitalize and use that diversity for you to not feel like you have to assimilate and put on a mask every day and emotionally feel drained because you're trying to fit in with a space that doesn't appreciate who you are, that doesn't allow you to talk about your family or children because you have to work so much, or doesn't allow you to be a woman and mother, or have a partner, or I don't know, be young. Did you, yeah?
What differences or what have you experienced in the current, like maybe the last 6 months in this political environment, this election year? What differences have you seen in comments coming from kids or feedback that you've received or differences you perceive based on what's going on?
You know, I'll say that a majority of the kids that come to our camp are on the process of being like-minded with where we are and, you know, how they align politically. They're thinking about that now. You know, some of them aren't able to vote yet, but we did this little survey one time at a meeting, and I was like, what are they talking about at your school? Everybody go around and say your name, say your pronouns, talk to me about what you're talking about at your school. And every single one of them said that they were talking about the election. That was what the conversation that they were having. These were sophomores and juniors in high school who aren't 18 yet, but you know, are conscious of what's happening in this bigger world and how these people in power who are trying to even be in more power are having conversations and how they're reacting to it. So, you know, it's pretty scary because they're watching and they're observing. They have access to information that we never had when we were kids too, so it's become this great equalizer for a lot of people because a lot of these youth are coming with a lot more knowledge and awareness of the world than we have. So I would say that, you know, they're a lot more in tune with what's really happening out there. Deb, did you have a question?
Yeah, but it's so obscure. I was curious in the beginning, you used the term enforcer boxes,
Oh,
which
yeah.
I'm not familiar, wasn't familiar with that term, but it sounds very powerful. I'm curious as to what
Yeah.
are those that are most
It's,
restrictive and,
Yeah.
because I'm thinking it's probably
Yeah.
religion.
so one of the things that we do, we have these activities in with confidentiality. We don't want the identities of people to leave camp. We want the impact of stories for people to share them and try to like impress us upon their peers. We also don't want the activities because part of what makes us powerful is that they come into camp not knowing what we're going to do. So Enforcer Box is an activity that we pair with our sexism nights. And the way the activity goes, so don't tell anybody.
This is being recorded.
Yeah. Is we have them think about gender and we go, okay, and right now our campus set up in a gender binary. So those identify as female, and then we go those that identify as male or masculine of center. And that's why we split up and we go, those that identify as female, tell us what does it mean to be a perfect woman, or girl, or female. And they tell us things like slim, quiet, submissive, blonde,
Gentle, nice.
yeah. Yep. Motherly, nurturing. And then we go, men, what does it mean to be man? And say strong, not
Brave.
gay. Yeah. A ladies' man, muscular. And then we go, what happens when you're not those things? And it's like I get called queer, or I get called a slut, or I get called
A prude, or I get called a nerd.
Yep.
You know, there are different
Yeah.
trigger words for so many of these kids, but it really gets them talking about the language that hurts each other. And you know, a lot of our programming, and it's really interesting when we have adults there as well, because we say, you know, what's a word that is said to you that still triggers you and still hurts you. And you know, we could go around the room and each, you know, talk about what those words are, but it's really making an impact on these kids. If you have a 40-year-old individual in this room and you're hearing like, oh, when they were 15 somebody called them fat, and so it's still sinking in, like that's the word that's really doing that. So it's also not only helping them, but it's, you know, to feel more empowered with themselves, but figuring out ways that they can be kind and understand that their language will have a lasting effect on people that they interact with as well.
So is
So
the
we-
enforcer box just the,
So we ask them, we go, what is expected of your gender? What happens when you don't perform to those gender standards? And then we push them another level and go, who enforces those stereotypes? And it's us. We do, our peers, the media, our parents, our faith, our friends, our families. And then we start challenging, how do you change this? How many of these messages that we write on here, because we use sticky notes, we're real classy, giant sticky notes, and we go, how many of these messages conflict with each other. So we'll have them, and we'll have ladies that say, I'm supposed to be, or men that are like, I'm supposed to be strong and not sensitive, or I'm supposed to be strong and a man and not cry. But I'm also supposed to be sensitive, and so.
So it's the enforcer boxes is really just looking at, you know, what are those things and getting them to realize like, oh, I have control over how I act or how I
And I'm in the same thing when Maggie was talking about the labeling activity of the names of the word that hurts the deepest, and when you have someone that was 15 and now it's 30 years later and they're taken back to that moment, how many of us have been victims or targets of those words, and how many of us have been perpetrators, I mean the ones that say them? And every single time they've all been targets and they've all been the perpetrators. And that's the power we hold, is we get to change that. We are part of the enforcer box. The companies we support, the people we vote for, that's part of that box and that system. Yep.
Do you have any pamphlets for parents that might want to discuss these things with their teenage kids?
Yes, and on our website we have a list of resources. And
Especially for parents, a list of fun books that you guys can read together
Okay.
in academic journals.
yes, and all age appropriate.
Yes. The other thing that I want to encourage is our community program, Omaha Table Talk, that happens monthly. Most of them happen on campus, where we're located in the Community Engagement Center on UNO's campus. Bring your kids. And at an age that they can reflect and start pondering these things. But like our last one in February was on race, and I had someone asking, can I bring my daughter? And I was like, yeah, sure. How old is she? She's like 10. Is that too young? I was like, it's never too young to start talking about these things. Because if we start talking about them now, then as you come into your adulthood, you'll be less nervous about saying things like black, or being like, do I say black or African American? It's like, I don't know. Ask them what they want to be called. Or ask them how they identify. So table talk is great because if you have and I bring my mentee in, she's 14, started mentoring when she was 9, and I bring her to these, and we kind of split up, and I make her do her own thing, and we come back together and go, what was the conversation at your table? She's like, we talked about this, I talked about this, did you know this? And I was like, no, go on. So the thing that she also likes about it is she has a seat at the table with the adults, and she feels like her voice is important. So split up, don't let them sit with you, make them go and talk on their own.
Yeah, and in ClueShip, our internship program, those kids that are in high school, they become facilitators. They're trained facilitators for us. So they're at Omaha Table Talk, and they're able to engage with youth and adults, and it's really great. So we're really doing the work of our mission, where we're educating and empowering and fostering that leadership and encouraging that advocacy. And you know, we hope this is something that we're still going to be able to be a part of in Omaha going forward. So I really appreciate your attention today and your great questions. And Krystal and I will be around for just a little bit longer if you guys need anything. And if anybody has any more questions, we can answer those. I'm not just trying to wrap this up. I just didn't know, like, with time. I thought we were supposed to be done.
We've got time for one more question.
Okay.
I know, I probably just scared everybody away, so, sorry.
Thank you again. Really, really appreciate it.